everybody, I'm Richard Michael Owen. Welcome to Owen Automotive. We're back on this 1959 Jaguar XK150 restoration project, nearly completing a ground-up restoration from the frame up. Welcome to episode 13. Let's get into it. All right, everybody, I'm going to show you what I've been up to. Been putting a lot of components in the engine bay in anticipation of actually starting the car. And there's a lot of little minor stuff I'm going to tour around here and show you that I've been doing that wasn't really worth videoing and recording the whole process completely. So I have finished the hydraulic system. You can see the brake and clutch reservoirs there. Kind of interesting, they're clamped at a different spot. And I'll show you I've done all the pipes. I've done the master cylinders and aligned the pedals to the floor. So that was a bit of work. Next up, I got the washer bottle here. This is an absolutely replica water bottle. The original one, I tried to sandblast the lid. It just turned into a whole bunch of holes. So this was the next best thing, get a replica one. And I needed to do that anyways because there's actually a vacuum tube in here and a diaphragm, and it's vacuum controlled. So I needed a new inside unit anyhow, so I wasn't going to get away from buying a new one of these. See the washer line in green going up to the firewall. Got a lot of grommets up in there, and I've been really fussing with my grommets. You can see my tack drive grommet here, this oval one. Wanted to make sure I had that on the car. And I got my wiper motor grommet too. Just getting really specific and making sure that everything's bang on correct. Okay, so next up, I put the distributor in. It has a Pertronix ignition system in it, which was fine. That's the way the car came, so I'm just gonna roll with that. Then I put this ignition wire system on with the loom holder. Now this came from Moss Motors, kind of a legacy product from XK's Unlimited. And I just stuck it on and I just love it. It just went on so beautifully. It's a really nice way to do these. It's cheaper for me to buy these units like this all made up than take all the labor and time to do it and charge the customers out. And yeah, this unit from XK's Unlimited with the Champion caps here just looks, I love it. I think it looks terrific. Thank you, Moss Motors. So just going over now here to the carburetor side. Now, I've done a few things before the carburetors go in. One is the coolant tube that runs underneath them. It's a little more difficult to set up once the carbs are on. I've also done the oil pressure sender line. You can see it coming off the oil pressure adapter here, going to the flexible line. Then I didn't know, I just made up this routing that goes up and into the firewall. And over here we can see I put the wiper motor in. It sticks way up here. It's rubber mounted, so it has a lot of flexibility to it while it's in the car. Now the voltage regulator, it's actually been completely gutted because what I have here is an alternator that's inside of a generator housing. So I just kind of bridge some gaps inside the voltage regulator to make it kind of a whole hidden kind of setup. And so we're gonna spend the next 20 minutes or so really getting into carbs. You know, have some patience with me. This is the longest time I've ever spent showing people how to rebuild carbs. And I spent a bit of time on the starting carburetor. So let's get into it. All right, time to do the entire intake system, including the carburetors. I'm going to start here with the manifolds and all the associated hardware. And I spent a long time cleaning this up. I didn't sandblast it, I didn't vapor blast it. Instead, I used walnut shell, blasted it with walnut shell, and I prefer that. It really keeps the grain and integrity of the aluminum, and it doesn't fill the cavities here with sand or any abrasives that I don't want inside the engine. So I really prefer that, just a walnut blast and a light acid wash. And I think it really has a nice original look and keeps the kind of the patina. And yeah, that's the way I like to go with those. The coolant pipe here, well, yeah, it was polished from the factory, and it was just kind of polished on the top here. If you can see in detail, it didn't go overboard, and even around these flanges here, it wasn't super highly polished. And so that's the way I like to keep it. Often people will go and they'll try to make a mirror finish out of all this aluminum. And I think that it's overdone and it's really hard to keep up. So this is the way I like to go, and I think it's more original. So what do we got here? Lots of parts to go on these manifolds. Got the thermostat here with this sleeve, and the sleeve kind of, I'll show you, it covers a slot in the housing. And yeah, you can put the wrong thermostat in and it won't perform nearly as well. Got the auto switch that controls the starting carburetor. The 4 little gaskets here, they go down this water pipe. They don't come with the kit, so you have to special order those. Thermostat housing gasket, you see the part number there. Little vacuum takeoff for the window washer system. I got associated spouts. I think this is one for the temperature adapter. It was not looking very good, so I ordered a new one. See the number there. Got some ring washers and all the studs to go in. I'll put them in with Teflon, get this thing together, then we can start putting the carbs together. And I know what some of you are thinking. Why is this guy taking all the studs out of the manifold? That's pretty unnecessary. If the threads are fine, just leave them in. Well, the reason I do this is twofold. One is so that I can address the flange surface, give it a light filing and making sure it's completely flat. You can see right here, it kind of raises up sometimes with a stud stick in, and that'll stop the carburetor from sitting flat. So that's really important. And second is so they can be refinished. I can refinish the original studs in cadmium, and they just look the part. I think it really smartens up the look. And while I install these, you can see I'm using some Teflon sealant. That's a trick I learned from my dad. I like this because it stops the moisture from getting in there, and it stops the corrosion. And so it just takes a little bit of force to free the Teflon, and it'll come out every time if need be. Okay, let's see if it works. Ooh, fogging everybody up here. I think I see it opening just slightly. Yeah, it's going down. Look at that. All right, everybody, it's carburetor time. Finished the intake manifold. Now it's time to get on to the main event. I think the simplest way to go about this is just follow the instructions that SU give us. This little guide here comes with the major rebuild kits, and it's a good way to go. Now, I've already cheated my friend Reese Kent at Island Automotion. He put in the throttle shafts and the new neoprene bushings, and he has a setup all ready to go on his lathe, so it makes sense for him to do that work. But we still got lots to do. Look, you can see what's left of the major rebuild kits. We had to buy the needles separately. They don't come with the rebuild kits. We got all the hardware here. These have been cadmium plated, and I give them a light coating of oil just to preserve that finish. Got the piston chambers. I polished those in the lathe. I'll show you what I did. I just kind of quickly polished them, get them down to about 1500 grit, and put the polishing wheel on there. If you want a better finish than this, more of a mirror finish, you can go to 2500 grit, then polish them. And we have all the parts here. You can see even the starting carburetor pieces. And I finished this just like the intake manifold. They all got walnut blasted and acid cleaned, and I like that. That way you're not putting any grit inside your engine. Okay, so the first step is jet centering. Really what I'm looking to do is get this tube, if I loosen this nut off, very centered around that needle. It has to be dead center. To do that, I have to make sure I have the body, the piston, and the dash pot from just one carburetor, the front carburetor. You can't mix and match. They have to be paired. And then what can happen is you can use the diaphragm and the jet tube here, stick it up in there, center it, and tighten down on this nut right here and lock it into position. But what I'm going to do today is use a small little tool here. I'll show you what that looks like. My dad has it, and that centers it from above, and I think it's a much more accurate way to go. So instead of using the needle to center the jet tube, instead I'm going to use this small tool. It goes in place of the needle. Just lock it down here. Hopefully pull somewhat of a focus. So now what I have to do is reassemble all three pieces. All three pieces are similar to the same carb. And what that's going to do is it's going to center the jet tube here from above. Okay, to get the correct setting, I'm going to use a long screwdriver. This is what my dad told me to use. To push down that piston, really center that jet tube, and then tighten the lock nut 3/8 Whitworth. All right, now I got the needle back where it should be in place of the fitting tool. I'm just gonna put the jet tube back on and see how centered it is. Just do a little visual inspection, make sure it's not way off. And that's looking pretty good. I'm happy with that, so we can go forward. Carburetors are coming together nicely. You can see the needles just poking out here. Next, I want to move on to the float chambers. Just a few things to mention. One of these fiber washers, these red fiber washers, they have to go directly on the lid. That's how the chamber vents. And then the valves. So there's two types of valves, two different ways to go here. Here's the original style, kind of a needle valve with a little rubber tip on it. And then there's the gross valve, which uses ball bearings. It has no rubber in it. And I do like these gross valves because they don't have any rubber in them. I don't know, what do you guys think? Should we be fitting the original style or the upgraded gross jet valves in there? Well, let's put these things together. All right, let's install this valve to the lid. It's got a tiny bit of sealant on there. First start it by hand. And I got my 11/32 driver here. Install the valve. Do not over tighten, just snug. There we are. Okay, next I can put the lever arm on. With this locking pin in there that comes with the kit. It slides through. I'll snug it up with the pliers here. There we are. Final thing, I gotta check the float level. My dad has this oval tube, so you can stick it in here on the lid, and rotate it upwards, and it should just barely touch. See, it pushes it up a little bit, so gonna move the level just a little more downward, but it's almost right on. All right, putting the float chamber to the carb bodies. There's a bit of a sandwich going on here. You can see a spring down in there, and there's the diaphragm jet, the jet assembly. And here's the where the enrichment screw goes. It actually just pushes this lever, which takes the jet, moves it downward, and enriches the mixture. Now, there's no choke built into these HD6s. Instead, there's a starting carburetor in the middle. It's fed from the front float chamber, and the fuel goes all the way down and across and over. So there's a bit more to the front carburetor, getting that starting carburetor set up. And I guess it goes without saying that all these parts have to be really clean. I acid wash them and brake clean them. You don't want any dirt or debris in this system, and that's why fuel filters are so important. So now that this rear carb's together, I can worry about my baseline mixture. I want it to be the same on both sides. And that's just a mechanical action here on this enrichment screw. So what I do is seat it down to the base. It touches about right there. Now we're gonna do 2 full turns down, and that'll be the baseline setting. So 1, 2, there we are. Baseline setting. I'll do the same on both carbs. So now that I have the baseline mixture set on this rear carb, I can work on the baseline idle speed, and that's handled by this what they call a volume screw. You can see it has a spring, little aluminum retainer and O-ring. It'll go down here in the threads. Then I can tighten down on this. I'll tighten it all the way down, and then it'll come back up 3.5 turns. That's the baseline setting. It'll be the same for both carbs. Yeah, one thing I should mention is that if you turn this idle screw down the whole way and you're still finding the car still has too fast of an idle, that means there's too much air escaping around the edges of the butterfly, or there's too much air going past your throttle shaft seals. So the front carb has a vacuum takeoff. It actually gets vacuum from this tiny little hole here. And I got to make sure that's clear and unobstructed for the vacuum advance to work. All right, before going too much further, I just wanted to make sure that this intake manifold was nice and flat where it meets a cylinder head. And lo and behold, look at this. I had a high point in the middle. Obviously, where the stud goes through here, it had been over-tightened at some point and just bent the manifold just ever so slightly. And so I did was just knock it down with a file, and now it's perfectly flat. All right, now it's time to marry the carburetors to the manifold, just holding it down lightly on the table. And you can see this front carburetor here has this funny bracket on the bottom. That's for the starting carburetor. There's all the pieces for it. It's a simple but ingenious device. And I'll go over its function when it's fitted to the carbs. It'll make more sense when it's all together. For now, I have to put on these carbs with the thick spacer washers and the SU provided gaskets. I love those with the brand on them. So I'm going to dope those up and we'll stick these carbs on the manifold. Time to synchronize the carburetors. They're connected with this small shaft and these kind of spring connectors. But one thing I have to respect is this switch. I think it's a switch for the overdrive and this arm that actuates it. So yeah, we're gonna put this all together right now. There we are. And this one slides in like that. So I'll tighten down on those connectors and we'll be ready to go and set up this arm in the right position as well. Okay, the carburetors are synchronized. Next up, time to fit this starting carburetor. Now, there's a banjo fitting on the bottom, and usually everywhere you go, you get provided with these fiber washers. Wherever I can, I try to use these aluminum crush washers. They just hold up a lot better in the fuel systems. And I'll put everything together with this gasket dressing, because if anything's gonna leak, it's gonna be this piping system well below the carburetors. Got some sealant here on this fuel line. Go to install the starting carburetor now. Unfortunately, my aluminum washers won't fit around these banjo bolts here, so I'm just gonna have to use the fiber washers. If there's any place that's gonna leak on this car, it has to be right here. Here's the connection to the bottom of the front carburetor. Another fiber washer. I'll screw that in loosely. We've got our banjo bolt. And we need a fiber washer between the banjo bolt and the holder. There we are. Another fiber washer, can you believe it? Which one's gonna leak first? And now we can screw that to the base of our starting carburetor. There we go. Next up is this pipe. It takes the air-fuel mixture from the starting carburetor and puts it into the bottom of the intake manifold. Now there's a flange here, a vacuum flange. So I have some anaerobic flange sealant, aluminum compatible. That's important because I really want a nice seal on there that won't break and cause a vacuum leak. And I have 2 O-rings on here. That's how this thing seals into the intake manifold, and this flange crushes it in. Okay, I tightened down on that flange. You can see the sealant just seeping through. That's great. So now I can work backwards. I'm gonna tighten down this olive fitting, these banjo bolts, tighten the carbs to the intake manifold, and that's my best shot at having no leaks. Next up, I wanna put the internals into the housing of the starting carburetor. Here you see the needle that goes down into the jet. And there's a disc soldered onto here with kind of a spring retainer to hold it up. And here's the solenoid that controls the air kind of going into the intake manifold. And so this is what clicks off and on to control the starting carburetor. I think it's a little easier to explain here from the shop manual with the cutaway. You can see the solenoid here, and it will control the air and fuel mixture going into the intake manifold. Now, here's that needle, and there's that little disc that's soldered onto it. And what happens is when you're first starting the car, and the throttle butterflies are closed, it creates a lot of vacuum. It sucks down this needle and it reduces the airflow mixture. Then as the accelerator is pushed, it lets the spring do more work because there's less vacuum, and it pushes the needle back up and kind of giving a correct air-fuel mixture for how fast the car is running. I know it's kind of complicated, but it's a pretty simple little ingenious device. Going back to the hardware here, I got the solenoid attached, and I want to show where this carburetor actually gets its air from. One is this small bore right here that goes down near the jet. That's what creates that really loud hissing noise. And the second air intake on this starting carburetor is actually just past this brass fitting that goes down into the main bore. And what that does is that really works the vacuum on this small disc attached to the needle and draws it downward when the car's first starting. My dad wanted me to point out that you can actually adjust the starting mixture here with this nut. It controls how much this needle moves up and down. So that just will go in here like this. Don't forget that spring. See, it's spring actuated here. Now there's a small little cover here. I guess this protects debris from falling in those holes. And now one thing that nearly caught me out is that this thing actually uses 1032 machine screws, not coarse thread like on the rest of the carburetor bodies. Oh, we're nearly done here. Okay, before I put my float bowl lids on, I'm gonna put a little fuel in here just to see if any of this connection points, any of these leak with those fiber washers in there. Let's see what happens. It's gotta leak, right? I'm gonna position it up. Put some fuel in here. Okay, is it gonna start leaking here? I don't see any immediate leaks. Okay, just the last few items. Got these solid core floats. I really prefer these. Don't want to be on the side of the road with a sunken float dumping all your fuel onto the side of the road. We've got both the chamber lids on here. They have a spring in there with a small filter. Make sure those are on. Now the drains. Make sure that fiber washer is on the lid. That's what helps it vent. I'll show you before I put this one on. See the lid there has a notch in there. That's why we need to put that fiber washer down first. The front original drain, these things are looking great. Cadmium plated, the original units. Certain car probably blocking the view. There, that one goes in. There we are. And the fuel rail, this is the original fuel rail, cadmium plated again. I was able to use the aluminum fittings on these aluminum washers, sorry, on these banjo fittings. Oh, this is looking great. Make sure to put my aluminum washers in there. Oh, this is nice. Last piece of bling are these dampers. I won't put any oil in yet because I'm going to store these sideways, but when I get it on the car, we'll put in some oil in these dampers. Look at that, there it is complete. Woohoo! Woohoo! Looking pretty complete now. Got those carbs installed. And I can finally kind of show the way that the starting carburetor functions with all the wiring hooked up. There's an auto switch here, which is a bulb down to the coolant passage. And that gives a ground signal to the starting carb solenoid here until it gets to a certain temperature. Then it breaks this connection, the auto switch does, and it stops the enrichment of the fuel into the intake manifold. Now, some people don't trust this switch, or sometimes it comes on a little too late. So often I see that these are changed to a switch on the dashboard. And that makes a lot of sense because sometimes you really only need choke just to initially start the car. Now, while I've been in here, I've hooked up this carburetor intake manifold system. I got the linkage installed, and I got the valve here for the heater. And I'll show you underneath, there's a bit of plumbing under there. I did the fuel line with an inline fuel filter, the vacuum line that runs over to the booster on the driver's side, and also the drains for the carbs, just hooked all those systems up. It was a bit of a pain, but there's an access window, luckily through the inner fender. So all I'm left with now, I gotta put a coil up here, I gotta put the radiator in, finish the cooling system, and we can get this engine started. Okay, what you saw me put in there was a brand new aluminum radiator. I've kind of painted it gloss black to hide the fact that it's an all new construction. And then the main core here, I just epoxy primed it so it's kind of a flat color. I think it has a nice contrast. What do you guys think? Got the cooling lines in here, the main cooling tubes in, and kind of routed the ignition wires. I see all manners of different routes for this ignition wires on all the various cars, but I think this is pretty smart the way it's looking right here. And one thing I should note is there's actually this tube I'll show you that runs underneath the frame. And it's kind of an unusual setup, but it's nicely supported. It attaches to the frame pretty securely. But I guess Jaguar were just trying to get as large of a core as they could in as tight of a space. All right, I've been busy inside here. You can see the wooden floors and the transmission tunnel, the steel transmission tunnel. It was a lot of work to get this to coalesce with that larger transmission unit, but I think I got it here. You can see these portholes here. These are access to the jacking points down in there. And I also fit an original Jaguar shifter to the Tremec, kind of adapted it here because I just think having the right shifter adds to the authenticity of this car. Well, let's see if it runs. You see these lights here. Woo! You can hear the starting carb hissing away. Pressure. Getting warmer. You hear that starting carburetor go? Awesome. Love it. Turn it off now. Well, how sweet was that? Engine starting run up and running smoothly, and we're only on the baseline setting, so it's going to get a lot better once we get the timing dialed in, get our carburetor mixtures correct. And I do have a few more things to put in here. I have to put the breather hose in here and the filter system, of course. But yeah, looking really good and complete, and super happy to have this car now running. And I was really impressed with this auto switch. You know, here it is, the original auto switch from 1957, still correctly controlling the starting carburetor here. And we have the original starter solenoid too. So Lucas, Prince of Darkness, maybe not so much so with the quality components from the 50s and 60s. So yeah, I can see the finish line approaching really, really soon. Maybe the next episode we'll get this thing running and driving down the road. But for now, just appreciating this engine bay. It's nearly complete. Got the light duck egg green there and that loom holder from Moss Motors and that gold coil. I don't know, I'm just really enjoying where this project's going and how it's looking at this state. So yeah, really looking forward to the next episodes. Thanks for holding in there with me, geeking around with those carburetors. And I promise you in the next episode, we'll have this thing driving down the road. But until then, that's it for this episode. Thanks for watching, everybody. As always, if you have any tips, tricks, comments, or trade secrets, I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below. All right, that's it. See you later, everybody. Bye-bye.